Since the beginning of recorded history, people have always sought to minimize the time spent getting between point A and point B. We have domesticated animals, built ships, developed cars, and created flying machines capable of traveling thousands of feet above the air at hundreds of miles per hour, all in the pursuit of closing the distance from your location to your destination. In all of this time, one creation stands out as the absolute peak of humanity's innovation in commercial travel, the Anglo-French Concorde. The Concorde, which entered service in 1976, was a supersonic passenger plane produced in a joint development project between the British and French governments. In spite of projections showing that the Concorde would never be profitable, the plane broke the barrier of speed, traveling faster than any other commercial plane before it. A variety of factors, such as Union influences, binational treaties, and political rivalries made this project successful. The very beginning of this story starts in 1943, when the US and Britain agreed upon a division of production in the wartime aircraft industry. The British would focus on fighters and smaller planes, while the US would focus on troop transports and bombers. In the long run, this decision would be catastrophic for the British aircraft industry, because none of their existing factories or designs could be quickly transferred to a peacetime economy. The US, on the other hand, had a plethora of infrastructure and designs that could be easily converted to a commercial market. After the failures of a multitude of turboprop designs, the British aircraft industry was suffocating and placed all of its hopes on a new technology, the jet engines of the de Havilland Comet. This is why the failure of the Comet was even more devastating for the British. Multiple design flaws grounded the Comet for 3 years worldwide, and in that crucial period, American manufacturers were able to catch up to Britain's jet propulsion technology. On top of Britain falling far behind in aircraft manufacturing, it was excluded from the formation of the European Economic Community. The EEC was a proto-EU that allowed the free flow of goods between its member states. Finally, the British aircraft industry was incredibly disorganized and had over 20 different airframe and engine companies. The British believed that a collaborative project between these companies would be an excuse for consolidation. Seeking inclusion, a grip on the aircraft market, and corporate consolidation, Britain formed a strong justification to collaborate with the mainland European nation to create a project that could catapult them back into aerial dominance and secure their entrance into the EEC. British designers wanted a long-range SST, or supersonic transport, so the Supersonic Transport Aircraft Committee was created to look into the viability of the project. Across the English Channel, France also sought to find superiority in the aircraft industry. While the French globally controlled medium-range transport production, American planes such as the Douglas DC-8 threatened France's position. They too believed that an SST was a viable option to maintain dominance, and this option only required a partner. However, the British and French partnership was no match made in heaven. Their respective desires to produce different range transports directly conflicted. However, after days of negotiation, the French agreed to the British terms. The British ultimatum was that if France refused, Britain would find another country, which would either be the US or West Germany. The French eventually agreed to the Concorde Treaty of 1962. Both nations were to share the risks and costs in producing an SST. A few signatures later, the first barrier in the Concorde saga was broken. Two seemingly irreconcilable desires were reconciled by careful negotiations and the natural human fear of being excluded. Now that the agreement to produce the Concorde has been made, the partners began work in 1965. The British handled mostly engine-related work, and the French industry focused on the airframe. The British government-backed corporation was the British Aircraft Corporation. The French corporation was Aerospatiale, which was a merger of Sud Aviation and Nord Aviation. BAC's main focus throughout Concorde development was repurposing the Olympus 22R engine, which was designed for military supersonic aircraft, into a civil version that could sustain supersonic flight for far longer. This repurposed version was dubbed the Rolls-Royce Snema Olympus 593 and was capable of moving the Concorde at speeds up to Mach 2.04. This engine is a turbojet engine, and to explain what that means, the two main types of jet engines need to be explained. Most aircraft use a type of engine called a turbofan, which is essentially an engine with a large fan that brings in and slightly speeds up the air as it moves into either the combustion chamber or the bypass duct. Air that moves into the combustion chamber is accelerated even further and provides a large portion of the thrust the engine produces. The remainder of the air passes through the bypass duct, which is not accelerated more after the initial fan. The larger the bypass of an engine, the generally more efficient it is because it takes less fuel to move the initial fan compared to all the more complex and numerous fans of the combustion chamber. A turbojet is a turbofan that lacks a bypass duct. The advantage of this is that it can travel at much higher speeds. The Olympus 593 could travel at 1,350 miles per hour, whereas the General Electric Gen X travels at around 570 miles per hour. The drawback of the turbojet is that it is incredibly less efficient. The Olympus 593 would use 46.85 pounds of fuel per mile flown, whereas the Gen X only uses 18.7 pounds of fuel per mile flown. Regardless of this fact, the Concorde was still produced with a turbojet engine, as producers believed that people would be willing to pay far more if they could travel the Atlantic in only 3 hours. In the early stages of development, many airlines, such as American Airlines and Lufthansa, placed pre-orders of the Concorde, which manufacturers saw as an incentive to continue. After 4 years of development, the Concorde prototype was ready to fly on March 2, 1969. Its test flights went very well, but the project as a whole was not running as planned. The project was incredibly over budget. It was expected to cost only $200 million, but ended up costing $1.3 billion. In 1970, the Conservative Party won control of the British government and had a strong desire to cancel so-called prestige projects such as the Concorde. In addition, many new projections were showing that the Concorde wouldn't ever be profitable due to its fuel inefficiency. However, the British were unable to cancel the project due to the fact that the agreement to develop the Concorde was an international treaty, which meant breaking it and ending work on the Concorde would require dealings at The Hague, which would not be pleasant for either Britain or France. This convinced the British to continue developing the Concorde in the face of overwhelming opposition within the government. Another factor that pushed the British to continue work on the Concorde was their desire to best their enemies on the other side of the Iron Curtain. The USSR was also working on an SST, called the Tu-144. The Tu-144 could travel just as fast as the Concorde, but was far less pleasant and was far more dangerous due to a lack of computerized systems. Unfortunately for the Concorde, it appeared that both of these factors would not be enough to save it, as it was almost cancelled in 1974, when the Wilson Labour government held talks with the French on its cancellation. However, an unlikely savior came to the Concorde's rescue: the British Aircraft Workers Union. Out of a desire to placate the Aircraft Workers Union and avoid the pitfalls of the prior Conservative government, which had alienated the Mine Workers Union, the Labour Party decided to allow the Concorde project to be completed. In 1975, after all the trials and near cancellations the Concorde had endured, it entered service under British Airways and Air France. In its 28 years of operation, the Concorde ferried over 2.5 million passengers across the Atlantic at twice the speed of sound. The service the Concorde provided was truly groundbreaking, but this was not enough to save it from retirement in 2003. Even though the Concorde could provide unparalleled speed, its inefficient turbojets simply made the cost of the Concorde far too high to sustain in commercial flight. For both airlines and passengers, crossing the Atlantic in 3 hours is simply not as valuable as crossing the Atlantic in 7 hours for only a small fraction of the cost. Even though the final end of the Concorde is a tragic one, the story as a whole is one of breaking barrier after barrier only to be stopped by the inescapable inefficiency of its engines. It cracked political barriers as it united two nations that had fundamentally different goals and made them work towards a single objective. It broke technological barriers as it solved many problems when traveling at supersonic speeds. While the Concorde is gone and is most likely never coming back, its iconic design has left its imprint in the minds of designers and everyday people alike, and has inspired many future designs, such as the Boom Supersonic SST, which has its first flight scheduled for 2023. The story of the Concorde demonstrates that human innovation is capable of leading humanity to places we never thought we could reach, and breaking barriers we thought indestructible. From the first man to domesticate a horse, to the first man to fly in an SST, Human beings have broken almost every barrier that has come their way, and the Concorde is a perfect example of this undying, innovative spirit of humanity.